How are you doing? Today we're going to talk about push feed versus control feed. And this is one of those topics that those of us that love bolt action rifles have been talking about for a while now. I guess 60 years, before my time. And I've got two rifles here, Winchester Model 70 and a Remington Model 700. And I can't think of any two rifles that represent the two extremes any better than these two. And real quick, for those of you that don't know, a control feed action, when you go to chamber a cartridge, it's in the magazine, your bolt's pushing on it. As it comes up, it slips underneath this extractor right here. So what happens is it fully controls the cartridge as it's being fed into the chamber. All right, a push feed doesn't. It simply pushes the cartridge up. Okay, and let's look at this in practice real quick. All right, with the control feed, as I push the bolt forward, it's grabbing that cartridge. Okay, now I'm not even close to closing the bolt, but it's got it. It is controlling it. Now let's look at the push feed. With the push feed, as I push forward, it's not controlling the cartridge. It's literally just pushing it. Now before we dive into this, I want to say there's a lot of great rifles that use both feeding systems. All right, so this isn't a deal breaker either way. But with that said, they are different. And that results in each having strengths and weaknesses that I just think is important to be aware of. Okay, for control feed, I think it makes a better hunting rifle. It's a more reliable feeding system. There's less to go wrong there. And that's why you dangerous game hunters, the consensus among them is control feed's the way to go. They can't afford a feeding issue when a lion's charging them. So, again, the consensus with them, control feed. But I think even more important is this large extractor. Your control feed rifles usually have an extremely large extractor. Usually it's a claw extractor, just like this. And if you end up with mud, grit, sand, whatever in your chamber, and you get a stuck case, this large extractor is probably getting it out. Your push feeds have a much smaller extractor. All right, it might get a stuck case out, might not. Okay. With that said, though, I think the push feeds make for a better target rifle. And that's because with the push feeds, you can just drop a bullet in from the top, close the bolt. You don't have to feed from the magazine. Now, they do have a bevel on the extractor so that it can pop up over the rim of a case on the control feeds. But it's a lot better if you operate these with the cartridges in the magazine. That's how they were intended to be used. And it just works better that way. With your push feeds, the extractor, it's a lot smaller extractor. It's supposed to pop over the rim of the case. So you can drop it from the top, no problem. And at the range, that's pretty handy to be able to just drop a cartridge in without having to put it in the magazine. And it's also really important when you reload and you start shooting heavier bullets, which people that target shoot tend to do that a lot. And in my case, this is 308 right here. I've got a 175 grain Sierra Match King bullet in here, and with how I have it loaded, this won't fit in this magazine. I have to shoot this as a single shot, dropping the cartridges in from the top. This cartridge is just too long. All right, so that's a huge advantage for me in this rifle, to be able to just drop it in the top, especially since it won't fit in the magazine. Now that doesn't mean you can't use either type of action for either application, target shooting or hunting. All right. I'd hate to tell Roy Weatherby or Remington that their rifles weren't great hunting rifles. They are. And this Model 70, I love shooting this at the range. This rifle's a tack driver. So either type of action works, either application. It's just one tends to be just a little bit better than the other, depending on the application. Again, push feed being, in my opinion, a better target rifle, control feed being a better hunting rifle. So, if you're going to spend a lot of time at the range, probably a push feed. If you're going to spend, all your time in the woods, probably a control feed. But they both still work, and they both still work great. We're just talking about minor differences here. With that said, I think understanding that helps us understand how we got to where we are with our rifles today. Remington came out with the 721 and 722 in 1948. Those were your first push feed bolt actions. Everything before that was control feed. So all of your great World War I battle rifles, they were all control feeds. Your Enfields, your M98 Mauser, 1903 Springfield, for hunting, Winchester Model 70, all of them were control feed, all the great rifles. Remington came out to push feed, which became the Model 700. And they did it because it's cheaper to make. They didn't change that because it's better, it's cheaper. They higher profit margin making the rifles. And after that, everybody was modernizing in the 60s. And the 60s, that was a huge change in the country, culturally, economically, so on. There are a lot of changes in the 60s. While the corporations started looking close at their profit margins, making changes to their products to make them less expensive to manufacture. All right, so, and this is where it gets tricky, and this is some stuff we're still dealing with today. Quality versus quantity, that type of thing. The control feeds are more expensive generally, almost always. Your budget rifles, they're all push feeds, cheaper to make. Right, when the 60s, all of a sudden, people are spending more money, there's a shift from the thought of, okay, I'm going to buy one rifle and it's going to last me the rest of my life, so I want the highest quality I can get. There was a shift from that thinking to, okay, I can get 3 or 4 rifles for, less money, and, I'll go that route. Quality versus quantity. At the same time, prior to the 60s, America, for the most part, was a very rural country. And so people, when they bought a rifle, and keep in mind, people didn't have a lot of money to spend. Okay, that 1930s compared to 1960s, that was a huge difference in terms of how, disposable income. All right, so in the 1930s, when you bought a rifle, most people weren't getting a nice one. They were getting just whatever they could get, and they just happened to be nice rifles in, a lot of surplus military rifles. So people just didn't have money in the 30s. But when they got one, they wanted it to last, and they had to count on it, and it was there to put food on the table, or they wasn't spending the money. They didn't have the money. Right, so it was a tool. Well, 1960s, okay, now all of a sudden, people have disposable income. And, they're moving into the suburbs rather than living out in the sticks. People are spending time at the range. Okay, so they can afford to buy ammunition to shoot at the range. Okay, that's a huge difference between the 30s and the 60s, just to be able to afford ammunition to go target shoot with. Okay, so you had a huge cultural shift. And all of a sudden, your push feeds, being great range rifles, they're really catching on. People are starting to see benefits of that, and they're getting away from the pure hunting and going to spending a lot of time at the range. Well, same way today. Very few of us are, spending most of our time in the woods. We're spending a ton of time at the range. And I think that's why your push feeds are still so popular today and remain so since the 60s, because they do fit the need of so many of us. And again, that whole quality, quantity, expense and so forth. So I think that's something we're going to struggle with from now on. At least that's something I struggle with all the time. There are a lot of great rifles out there, the old rifles, that I would love to have, but I just can't, see myself spending that much money for a rifle. At the same time, I've got, quite a few rifles in the gun case, and, for what all those cost, I could have bought one of those really, really nice rifles. So, it's something we're going to struggle with from now on. But it is interesting to think about, and I guess it's good that we do struggle with it, and that, we can still appreciate, a really well-made quality hunting rifle. At the same time, we can also appreciate a really well-engineered and very functional target rifle. And again, both work for either application. I've killed many deer with this exact rifle right here with the hunting load. So anyway, all right, folks, if that helped out in any way, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps out the channel. And I'm curious to hear y'all's thoughts on this. So comment it below. What's your thoughts on the quantity versus quality and control feed versus push feed? And if you want to see any future videos, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to be notified. I think that about covered it for control feed versus push feed. God bless and have a good day.